Hello and welcome to Tomi Talks TV, the place to be to build great love relationships. I'd like to start by saying a very big thank you. Thank you for all your likes and your shares and your comments on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. I really appreciate you because you're helping us spread the message further, faster. So thank you very much indeed. Now today I'm going to be talking about what I have titled, How to Stay in Love with Your Spouse. Now think about it for a moment. You've been married for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Are you still in love with your spouse? And if not, what are you going to do about it? Because you see, marriage was not designed for you to just live together as man and wife without actually actively loving each other from day to day. God designed marriage such that you and your spouse can stay in love while you face the challenges of life together. But you see, the thing is this, many people do not make it in marriage, not because they have not found the love of their lives, but because they have not learned how to love that person for life. And that's what I want us to talk about today. Now, there are 3 tips that I'd like to share with you today about how to stay in love with your spouse. And I believe that these will help you. Now, the first of them is this. In order to stay in love with your spouse, you need to get over yourself. What did I just say? Get over yourself. Get over yourself, because true love is not an I-centered experience. It's an other-centered experience. So if you focus all your time and your attention on what your spouse should be doing for you, how they should be making you feel, how they should be responding to you, then you will find that you will not experience the satisfaction that you ought to experience in marriage. So true love is all about focusing on the other person and seeing how you can pour out your life to be a blessing to that person rather than what you can get from that person. So it's about giving, not just about getting. Now let me read a scripture for us which I think speaks very well to this topic. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 24, it says, "Let no one seek his own good and advantage and profit, but rather each one of the other, let him seek the welfare of his neighbor." In other words, let your focus not be on what I can get for myself, but rather what can I give. And I think this scripture speaks particularly to the marriage context. So when you take your eyes off how your spouse is making you feel, what they should be doing for you, and you begin to focus on what you can do for them and how you can be a blessing to them, then it makes it a whole lot easier to stay in love with them, because your focus is on giving and not on getting. Now, the second tip I'd like to share with you is this: release your spouse from the weight of your expectations. Now, am I saying that it's wrong for you to have expectations of your spouse? Well, the reality is that when we get married, we all have expectations of, how we feel, a good husband should behave, how a good wife should behave, how they should make you feel, and all the rest of that. But you see, when you enter into marriage, the best way to stay in love is for you to release your spouse from the weight of those expectations. Because the thing is this, when we constantly place expectations on our spouse. So, if I act like this, he should act like that. If I say this, she should say that. And, you find that, what happens is that you place an expectation on your spouse, then they don't meet up to that expectation, then your estimation of them drops a little bit, or the way you view them drops a little bit, and then you expect something else of them, and then it's like you're disappointed again, and then you drop your the way you see your spouse, your attraction and your interest in your spouse a little bit more, because you feel that you have been disappointed. And little by little, this is how people fall out of love. But you see, I've come to realize that when you release your spouse from the weight of your expectations, and rather you leave them to be accountable to God, and you focus on what you should be doing in the marriage, it makes all the difference in the world, I can tell you that. Now, I found out that almost every Christian man knows the scripture Ephesians 5:22, wives be submissive to your husbands. And almost every Christian woman knows Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25, husbands love your wives. But there's a scripture in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 21 which we often don't quote, which speaks to both of us, and it says, "And furthermore, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." So that was the first commandment that was given concerning the relationship between a husband and a wife in marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, before it went on to the specific roles of husband and wife. So we're saying you submit to each other because you reverence Christ. constantly think about the needs and how to be a blessing of the other person because you have a reverence for Christ. So it's all about, what can I do for you? How can I be a blessing to you? So rather than focusing on the scripture that speaks to your spouse and says, oh, wives, you should be doing this, husbands, you should be doing that, rather focus on, what should I be doing in this marriage to be a blessing to my spouse? And lastly, in order to stay in love with your spouse, be a good forgiver, because the reality is this: true love is not all about two perfect people living together. It's about two imperfect people who have learned how to extend grace to each other constantly on a day-to-day basis because they have received grace from Christ. So your spouse will always do things that will hurt you. That's the reality of marriage. From time to time, they will do things, that you don't expect them to do, or every now and then they will not do things that you expect them to do. But are you a good forgiver? Have you learned how to extend grace? Because when you learn to extend grace, then you're able to restore your spouse back to the place where they should be in your heart, and it makes it easier for you to stay in love with them. Well, I hope this has helped you. If this has helped you, then please leave me a message on Facebook or Twitter. And if you've got a question you would like me to answer, then head on over to tomitalks.com/ask and I'll answer your question next time. See you next time. Bye-bye.